Welcome to The Debate.
Today, our focus is on the central methodology inside the source material, achieving happiness.
Right. The text tries to map a path from despair all the way to a state of complete contentment, but it gives advice that spans behavioral, emotional, and physical domains.
So the question for us, really, is one of first principles. Where does the material argue that sustainable happiness actually comes from?
Exactly. Is the primary path rooted in proactive, externally visible things like disciplined actions and rituals, what we could call the structured doing?
Or is it fundamentally dependent on a more deliberate internal awareness and emotional validation, the necessary being that has to happen first?
I'll be arguing that the material overwhelmingly prioritizes disciplined actions and structure. I think it frames happiness as an application problem that requires perseverance.
And I'll take the opposing view. I think that while actions are, of course, vital, they're really just the expression of an already reconciled internal state. The true prerequisite is that internal clarity.
Okay, so for me, the core of my argument really just rests on the sheer prominence the material gives to structure and physical execution. Achieving happiness is presented almost like an engineering challenge. The body has to run, and I'm quoting here, like a well-tuned engine.
Physical effort, a workout, a set routine, a hearty meal, not just quiet introspection. This daily commitment to discipline is highlighted over and over as playing a huge role in how the rest of the day unfolds. The material explicitly says this structured doing directly results in physical benefits, like the release of endorphins from exercise, which helps you stay in a state of bliss. It's a clear pathway. External discipline leads to internal chemical stability.
I appreciate the focus on structure, I really do, but I have to push back on this idea that it's the foundation. I mean, if you build a beautiful structure on a cracked foundation, it's just going to fail eventually. My position is that the text identifies these significant psychological toxins that you absolutely have to clear out before any action can really be effective. Just consider the necessity it places on internal reconciliation, especially in Chapter 8, Learn to Forgive Yourself and Others.
Sure.
The material isn't just offering that as a helpful tip. It frames forgiveness as, quote, vital. Why? Because unforgiveness, this internal, unresolved state, is scientifically shown to disturb the body's chemical makeup. It leads to stress, anxiety, even chronic physical pain. So in this framework, the engine that you want to tune is already being damaged by an internal poison. No amount of structured activity is going to counteract a poison that's fundamentally disrupting your physiology. So I would argue the internal release and emotional repair have to come first.
It is interesting that you prioritize forgiveness, which is an internal act, over the immediate positive effects of action. But I think you might be misreading the implied causality in the material. While, yes, internal burdens have to be addressed, the text seems to present action as an immediate lever, a way to create the mental space you need for that kind of repair. The foreword says that being happy has positive effects on the body and the mind. So by engaging in energizing activities, you immediately shift your state of the mind for the better.
It suggests a positive feedback loop that's initiated by physical structure. The body's vitality sort of pulls the mind out of despair, which then enables the deeper, slower work of forgiveness later on. We're told the state of the mind ensures that happy people are almost always healthy people. That correlation implies a really robust link between physical health, which is achieved through action, and mental stability. The structure gives you the momentum to break the cycle.
I find that problematic, though, because it seems to minimize the material's specific warnings about acting without internal clarity. If action were truly primary, why would Chapter 2 spend so much time on the emotional landscape? That section cautions us that we have to be aware of the follies of just following one's feelings.
Right.
Which means that any action, even a prescribed daily ritual, runs the risk of being misaligned if it bypasses the discerning intelligence of the mind. The sequence it presents is crucial. You identify the feeling, you categorize it, and then you determine the wisest course of action. If we skip that difficult work of identification just to jump into a ritual, we risk just masking a destructive underlying emotional issue. The material explicitly warns that ignoring those linked feelings can cause grave damage. So action without that internal filter isn't a positive feedback loop. it's just a temporary suppression of a deeper problem.
You present emotional processing as this passive reflective state, but even that requires sustained, focused effort, which, brings us right back to discipline.
Well, I wouldn't call it passive.
Okay, fair. But look at the pursuit of passion in Chapter 4. Finding your passion isn't some sudden epiphany. It requires the active, dedicated behavior of trying many different things. And then you use that passion as fuel to work on difficult tasks until successful completion is achieved. The material doesn't frame passion as a gift you just receive. It frames it as a state you achieve through sustained effort. The doing is what lets you discover what brings you joy in the first place. Without that disciplined external exploration, the internal idea of passion is just theoretical. It's inert.
I agree that perseverance is essential, but perseverance towards what? You're focusing on the labor of finding passion. I'd contend the material is emphasizing the internal resonance that passion has to create. I mean, the definition of passion in the text is something that aligns with the self, that provides deep personal meaning. That alignment requires self-honesty, a rigorous internal check before you even start the execution. If I just force myself to try things for the sake of completion, I might achieve a goal, but that's not necessarily the happiness the source material is talking about. It's the internal validation of purpose that fuels the perseverance, not the other way around. The action you're championing is a means to an end, whereas internal clarity is the compass you need for that action.
This difference in perspective really brings us to the motivation structure in the text. And here, I believe the material favors external rewards quite significantly. You focus on the deep, intrinsic rewards, but look at how Chapter 5, Do for Others, is justified. It's not presented as purely altruistic. It's framed as a critical social lubricant that generates measurable external social capital. Giving leads to popularity, it fosters healthier ties, and most transactionally, it ensures that a lot of people will be more than willing to help the individual if the need arises. The material is teaching you how to build a supportive, happy reality through consistent external good behavior. That positive feedback loop, action leading to social benefit, which reinforces happiness, it shows that visible outward behavior is primary.
That's a compelling point about the social component. I'll grant you that. But let's analyze what happens when the underlying internal state fails, when the structure you champion meets real-world emotional stress. The text gives a pretty chilling warning about the destructive power of failing to manage internal sadness.
It does.
It warns that if these feelings are ignored, friends and family will eventually turn away. They'll lose patience, and the individual is left socially isolated. The material states explicitly that external rewards and relationships cannot withstand sustained internal neglect. That means the emotional foundation holds a devastating veto power over the entire external structure you've built. Your actions might generate popularity, sure, but your internal state is what dictates whether those relationships can even be maintained. That proves internal management is the prerequisite.
That's a powerful argument about the consequences, but I would argue that even avoiding that despair requires a structured physical intervention, which brings us to the physiological debate about chemical regulation. I still maintain that structure is the most direct path to chemical happiness. Chapter 9 on exercise and endorphins is instructive. Endorphins are described as the body's natural way to suppress pain and create pleasure. The material advocates turning to exhausting workouts to achieve adequate levels. This is the clearest method in the text for chemically managing your mood through deliberate physical exertion. It's behavioral medicine, a physical input for a reliable chemical output, and it bypasses the sometimes sluggish process of self-reflection.
I'm just not convinced by the certainty you're assigning to that physical cause. If we scrutinize that very same chapter, the material itself introduces a critical ambiguity. The text immediately qualifies the role of exercise by stating, and I'm quoting, "Some medical experts are at odds as to whether the endorphins are released by the physical exercise or because of the mental pressure from meeting the physical challenge."
But
That uncertainty fundamentally shifts the emphasis away from just the physical act.
If the response is due to mental pressure, a cognitive interpretation, then the physical motion is simply a trigger, not the source.
But why dedicate an entire chapter to physical exercise then, if the true cause is cognitive? It's because physical exertion is the most predictable, universally accessible mechanism to get that chemical output. The exercise regimen is the tool for immediate stability. It doesn't matter if the endorphins are released from the strain or from mentally overcoming the strain, you still have to choose to do the action to get the benefit. Therefore, the action is primary.
The fact that the text lists such different activities like eating spicy food, achieving an orgasm, running a marathon, as triggers for endorphins suggests the physical act itself is pretty arbitrary. What those actions share is an internal physiological response to a sharp sensation, be it pain, pleasure, or challenge. If the physical act is just a catalyst for a deeper response, then the focus has to return to the individual's internal capacity to process that response. Relying solely on the external trigger risks turning happiness into a series of distracting behaviors, rather than a unified state of being.
In summary, my position emphasizes the clear, actionable framework the material provides. Put together the daily ritual, maintain the physical engine, find your passion, and execute it. Happiness, from this perspective, isn't found in passive reflection, but in the conscious perseverance required to implement these changes. The structure is the stability, and the action provides the momentum.
And my analysis holds that the foundational internal work, identifying feelings, achieving the psychological release of forgiveness to correct the body's disturbed chemical makeup, is the absolute primary requirement. External actions are just expressions of an already harmonized internal state. If the internal state is toxic, the external reality will eventually collapse. I think the true challenge the material presents isn't choosing between action and reflection, but understanding how to integrate the inner compass with the external ritual to get that unified state the author describes. We have to explore the internal landscape before we can chart a sustainable external course.